We have a very special episode of the NFL War Room podcast today. Not really talking NFL, talking college football. My co-host Matt Giattina's back. Coach Matt, welcome back. And we have the executive producer, the host of Hick at Night, the host of the Blue Horseshoe podcast, Ryan Hickey, Trace himself, is here with us. How you doing, Hickey?
Fellas, what's going on? Thanks for having me. Dude,
it's good to see you. It's good to see you. It's funny that you are a mutual friend between both me and Matt, and we've just from two different worlds, but this worked out really good. Before we jump into college, also we are an NFL podcast first, and you are a Colts fan. Can you just honestly touch on the Jonathan Taylor thing first? But just, are you okay? Are you okay? I feel like being a Colts fan has been very rough for the past 10 months.
This sucks. This sucks for multiple reasons. Number one, first and foremost, the only thing that matters this offseason, right, is developing Anthony Richardson. That's all that matters. The next 5 years, 10 years, in a way, is dependent on how he develops in his rookie year and how he moves forward. And a large part of his development is going to be putting good players around him. You both know it. It's not rocket science. How you develop young quarterbacks now in the NFL, partly, is by putting good players around them. What a concept. What a thought. And right now, the Colts do not have a lot of talent at receiver or tight end. The most talent they have for the skill positions is at running back in Jonathan Taylor. So for me, I think it's very simple. You pay the man. I get it. Running backs are devalued, and no one is paying running backs right now whatsoever. I understand it. But for the most part, even though that philosophy has worked, I think each team, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. For me, in 3 years, I know he missed 6 games last year and was a little bit banged up. Jonathan Taylor, even in those 3 years of one being not great, has, to me, earned and done enough to get a contract extension, especially since you have $20 million in cap space, a quarterback starting a 5-year rookie contract, and you have no one else really around him that could make defenses worried. Lock Jonathan Taylor up. Even if he falls off a cliff in 3 years from now, most of the guaranteed money is going to be already paid out. By that point, you can cut him no problem. A lot of teams have cut their star running backs pretty easily for the most part. So the cap is not something you have to worry about too much. Pay the man, get him on the field, make Anthony Richardson's development easier going forward, and let's get this ship going in the right direction. And not only are they not paying him, they're making a complete circus out of it. So how am I doing? To answer it shortly, not great. Not great.
Oh, that's rough. And listen, I am part of the you don't pay running backs committee, but I'm with you. I would have actually paid Jonathan Taylor. You would give him a 4-year deal. It's really a 2-year deal with the guaranteed money.
Right, that's fine.
And the Colts have so much cap space coming up that it's not a big deal, right? You get a little bit of money, and the South is so bad, right, that a running back like Taylor might sway the South, right? Because you're only trying to win 9 games with the South here. There's no juggernauts coming out of the South right now. This team's not going for a playoff push, right? That's not what they're about right now. But yeah, I'm with you. I think I honestly think I should have extended Taylor, a year prior. He got hurt, so that kind of delayed things. But yeah, I'm with you, and I think it just builds off of the absolute circus that Jim Irsay's Colts have been for the past 10 months, starting with Matt Saturday being the head coach.
I saw a interesting, I wanted to just to add this. I saw an interesting meme, and it was a picture of a hand passing off a baton to another hand, and it was Dan Snyder passing off the baton to Jim Irsay.
Oh, no.
There was no cocaine remnants on the baton.
I was going to say it's the dime bag. What are you talking about?
But it said, the worst NFL owner, passing the baton. And just to add, insult to injury, today, I think it was today or yesterday, Zach Moss, their backup, right, breaks his arm out at least, I think they said 6 weeks. So now that leaves them with rookie Evan Hull, I believe, out of Ole Miss, as their main running back.
Northwestern, show some the Big Ten some respect.
So Northwestern,
yes. Later.
So, there you go. So, it's good luck because, and realistically, that bodes well, in my opinion, for Jonathan Taylor, right? And there's a lot going on with the whole back situation with him. Is there a back injury? Is there not? We don't know. So it's a weird situation that I don't see getting any better. But yeah, good luck with that.
Matt, you help me out. I'm not a coach. I'm just a fan, right? You help me. You see a guy like Jonathan Taylor. If you were in the position to pay someone, is that someone you would pay, like in this specific Colts situation? Am I crazy here?
No,
or you get what the Colts are doing.
I don't agree with the Colts because, and I'm with Matt in terms of, hey, you don't pay these guys. I believe in that. I also believe in that. However, I do believe in the top tier guys making a difference. I really do, like the Christian McCaffreys of the world, the Saquon Barkleys, and Jonathan Taylor fits into that mold, right? So, you talked about a young Anthony Richardson. What's going to help his development? You brought it up, but a running game is a young quarterback's best friend. Simple and plain. Zach Moss is out. Zach Moss wasn't giving you that anyway. Again, do you turn to a Dalvin Cook? Who's, older? And I don't know. It's a really interesting situation, but I agree with you, Hick. I think, keep him for 2 years and help Anthony Richardson out. He's the face of your franchise, and you're just going to screw his development from day one.
If paying Dalvin Cook is the answer, then they fucked this whole thing up, right? Because Dalvin Cook is still going to want like $12 million.
No, he is, and he's got to just pay Jonathan Taylor,
right? And Dalvin Cook is going downhill. Like you've seen, like his advanced analytics showing that he's been on a decline, pretty steep decline the past couple seasons. Jonathan Taylor still has a couple of years before he goes, off the cliff, which it's going to happen probably about 2 years. But if you're going to pay the money, just give it to Taylor. Like what are we doing here? But yeah, they're an absolute joke. And I think in the division where you only really need 9 wins to win the division, a couple star players can do that for you, right? And I think an offense with Richardson and Taylor would be very interesting. But we probably won't get to see that, and we'll be. But I guess the other side though is, who would even trade for Jonathan Taylor, right? Like, no one's going to want to re-up that contract. No, we haven't seen what he can do post-injury because we don't. We don't know what he can do. And no one's going to want to lay out those assets for it. So unless Jim Irsay just doubles down the you don't matter thing and trades him for a 7th and it says, fuck it, I don't need you. Which, listen, 7th in a dime bag could do it. Could do it. So we'll see. We'll see where he goes. But yeah, I feel bad for you, Hickey. I really do.
I'll say bare minimum. He's on the team for 2 years. I think guaranteed. He's going to play this year. You can't sit out as a running back now. So that's where the Colts. It's been ugly. It's been embarrassing. But Jonathan Taylor has no leg to stand on. He has no leverage whatsoever. Sitting out does him no good. So he'll play this year. They'll franchise tag him next year. We'll see what happens in 2 years from now. If anything can be repaired at that point or the contract comes at that point. But I think bare minimum 2 years will be on the team. After that, at age 26, I think he'll be going into his free agent year. Can't promise anything after that, but I think still next 2 years, the way the contract is, franchise tag, it makes too much sense. It's impossible for the Colts not to take advantage of that cheap labor for a great talent in at least the next 2 years, bare minimum.
Yeah, well, I agree. All right, let's hop over to college. The real reason we're talking today. As I was saying before, there are a few things to stay constant in life, right? Taxes, colleges switching conferences, and Ryan Hickey and I applying for the same jobs. But we're not talking about Ryan Hickey showing up in a tuxedo for the DA show interview, which, by the way, legendary. But the conference realignment. Colorado surprises nobody, jumps ship to the Big 12, which essentially since the UCLA-USC news, we've known Colorado, Utah, Arizona State have been on the Big 12 docket. It is not a surprise to anybody. Colorado finally does it. Now we're seeing rumors of Arizona State. We see that they have a meeting tomorrow at 3:30 local time. Brett McMurphy is throwing out eyeballs. Either he knows something or the porn he's watching is just fucking making him go nuts. or maybe him and Jim Irsay are both doing coke together, and it's crazy. But something's happening at the McMurphy household. I have a feeling it's more in lines with probably Oregon and Washington going somewhere and not the Arizonas, because that's not surprising to anybody. I think surprising would be Arizona State not going to the Big 12. But it seems right now like this continuation of a 10-year ongoing clusterfuck that seems that have been going on since I was in college. So I know I've been in college a bit longer than you guys. I graduated in 2013. I think you guys are still youngins. I remember when that initial wave was going through the most recent part of college realignment, right? With like Texas, with their Big Ten, with their Longhorn network, and Nebraska moving to the Big Ten, and all the shitstorm that happened. And you kind of knew then it wasn't done, right? We were going to continually get to this next part. It took a decade for it to really get there, but now it seems like we're hitting the fast forward button, and we're getting to this kind of inevitable outcome. We always knew Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado were gonna go off somewhere else. I didn't think it'd be the Big 12. I thought they were gonna die, but thankfully for the Big 12, the Pac-12 decided to be really just kind of killed themselves, right, with inaction. Which I will say, Hickey, you being a Big 10 guy, I was super nervous when the Big 10 came out and they were like, "Oh, we're partnering with the ACC and the Pac-12, and we're not going to do anything." Which would have really, if they did that, the SEC would have wiped shit with them and it would have been done. But they went out and they were like, "By the way, fuck you guys, I'm taking the two best schools in California and ripping them away." But that saved the Big 10, right? The Pac-12 not doing anything killed them. And I think what you're going to see is that the ACC not doing anything is also going to kill them in the coming months. But we're starting to get to that point now. Arizona's probably leaving. Oregon and Washington, I've been told, have already been accepted to go to the Big Ten. I think that is only a matter of time. The only reason I don't believe they're not part of the Big Ten right now is because I think the Big Ten's number one priority is Notre Dame. I think that is their number one priority. They want Notre Dame. And Notre Dame also kind of has a little bit of leverage. They're one of the few remaining top tier programs left. Right? Now that USC, Texas, Oklahoma are gone, you can argue Clemson, you can argue Florida State, you can argue Miami, but I think Notre Dame's like the only school or football program worth like $1 billion. That's it. Everyone else is worth under that. So when you bring in Notre Dame, they're going to probably want to dictate, the next moves of the Big Ten, right? Are you taking Stanford? Are you taking Cal? Are you taking these rivalries they've had in the past? Are you not taking them? So we're going to see what happens there. But here are the rumors I've seen, and before I throw it over to you, Hickey, I have seen, I think it was a Barstool Reports, but we don't really know how legit it is, but it wouldn't surprise me. Clemson and Florida State being on the docket for the Big Ten, which I think would be genius because you want to eat into the SEC's not even like recruiting bubble, because at this point recruiting is national, but you want to eat into that market, right? And then Oregon, Washington going to the Big Ten, and you're seeing the like I said, the Arizona schools and Utah joining Colorado. So Hickey, your initial reaction to what's been going on this week and what you think is going to be going on in the next, could be in the next 24 hours.
You said, it's not surprising. Everyone at this point, right? The Pac-12, it's 9 schools with Colorado leaving that are just fending for themselves. And you see on, Monday afternoon, George Kliavkoff and the Pac-12 announced that in the next 48 hours, they're going to announce their brand new media deal. I'm going to assume, Matt Squared, it's not going to be one that's riveting or one that's going to keep Oregon, Washington, Arizona State staying in the Pac-12. Not to mention, you have 9 schools in your conference starting next year. Unless San Diego State flip-flops again and leaves after saying they were going to leave and then not going to leave and couldn't find an entry point in anywhere else. So they went back to the Mountain West, kind of with the tail between their legs. I don't see how the Pac-12 going forward is going to make it. I want to throw something by you both. You mentioned it, Matt. Basically, a decade ago, this started with Texas and the Longhorn Network, and we saw Nebraska go from the Big 12 to the Big 10. We saw Colorado a few years before that go from the Big 12 to the Pac-12. I think eventually, now, I don't know, I can't tell you when this is going to be. It could be 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. I would love for this to happen sooner rather than later. College football needs a breakaway. You take basically the Power 5 schools. So there's 65 Power 5 schools. Maybe you expand a few, include Boise State, include San Diego State. I'm not tied to a certain number. It could be 50, it could be 60, it could be 70. Break away, form your own league, and sell that league like the NFL. Meaning, the NFL sells the NFL. It's you buy, if you're CBS, if you're ESPN, you're NBC or Fox, you buy the NFL. You don't buy the NFC South. You don't buy the AFC West. It's yours buying into the entire NFL. Then obviously they divvy it up based on contracts, and obviously they divvy it up AFC, NFC for the most part with CBS and Fox. That's what college football should do, because right now college football is individually sold based on conference. Big Ten right now is the biggest moneymaker. That's going to change soon. The SEC and that ESPN deal hits. So it's the Big Ten, it's the SEC, neck and neck in terms of revenue schools are getting. And then it's a steep drop between them and everyone else. So at this point, if you want parity in college football, you need to provide schools with resources. And how they do that is by getting money. And how they do that is by getting some sort of TV deal that's not crappy like the Big 12, not outdated like the ACC, and not kind of thrown together like the Big 12 and what they're doing with their, 12 teams from all over the place here. Break away. How about this? Have a commissioner where you actually get some order and get some rules put in where everyone's kind of in agreement and modernized, and form your own league and basically have it be the NFL Junior in the sense of how it's run, but it's the best programs. Like, it's ridiculous. In 2023, Alabama and Toledo are in the same league, essentially fighting for the same thing.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I will say, I heard you give this spiel on Hick at Night, which is on from 2A to 6A Eastern on CBS Sports Radio.
Prime time.
I was listening to it because you can find it on podcast form. I was listening to it on podcast form to Hick at Night as I was driving back in some Indian food. So I heard this pitch. I love this pitch. So let me give you a pro and then the kind of reason why I don't think it's going to happen. So I agree with you. I think that the idea that Alabama and Toledo, or even Alabama and Boise State, are fighting in the same conference division is ridiculous, right? They're not, the money those two schools are generating is just like, they're nowhere close to each other. Even the stadium sizes aren't even close. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me. And it hasn't made any sense for a long time. I've always felt like there should have been another level of Division I where you have these schools that run their programs like a business, right? Like in Alabama and Auburn and Oregon and Washington, Michigan, Ohio State, right? Because you go into a school like, not to keep on shit on Toledo here, but like Toledo reminds you of like old school college ball. You got the band playing, that got the fans there that are ripping their Toledo colors, but there's not money going into that school the way that Alabama is, right? Like, you're not getting the same kind of prospects. You're not paying those players. And with the NIL now that they have the NIL, it's impossible to recruit any of these kids. It's absolutely impossible. Like there was a tackle from Rhode Island that Matt and I were watching. Was it last year?
This past year.
This past year. Who, good right tackle, not a great player, like an average player. And from my sources was asking for almost $1 million, right? Ridiculous. And this kid's like an okay player.
Can't ask you don't get.
Like, he might get drafted at some point, right?
Maybe.
Right? And I forgot where I think he went to Oregon, maybe. I forgot exactly where he went.
He did.
That's the kind of kid that at one point would have gone to Toledo, right? Now, $2 million to pay a kid. They don't. Like, honestly, no one does. And we talk about NIL, and I think the problem with NIL, which is really kind of driven this problem up, they made everything. I know they're trying to make it kind of above board now, but somehow it's still more secretive, right? Because you still have these schools negotiating on behalf of these players to, Bob's Car Wash for $1 million. Bob's not coming and talking to 5-star prospects. That's the DPP. That's the GM. That's the head coach. That's the booster, and making that play, right? So you still have this like horrible system of paying players, and not that I'm saying that players should get paid. They absolutely should, but it should be more like the NFL in terms of you have a set number of money, usually deriving from a TV contract, to pay your guys, right? That way, an Alabama booster can't just pay $50 million for the top 7 prospects. Because that's when you get into the lack of parity in the league, right? Because you get these boosters who just have ungodly amount of money paying these kids to go somewhere. Like, can you tell me people want to go play for Jimbo Fisher and A&M? No, nobody does. But they're paying you a lot of fucking money to go play at A&M. That's why they get those recruits. So I agree. You need to separate these two these two levels of college ball. Is it 50? Is it 60? It's probably not 60. It's probably closer to 50. And I think it's not even based on winning or culture or history. I think it's really just based on revenue, right? The amount of money your program makes. And there are probably only 45 to 53 programs that make that kind of money where it makes sense. Now, the reason why I don't think it's going to happen, right? You're asking people with power to willingly give up power, right? With the Big Ten and the SEC both kind of being that 1A, 1B, especially if the Big Ten lands Clemson and Florida State. Right now, the SEC is still number 1, and I think there's no one's going to argue that. But if the SEC starts losing control of their own home base in the Southeast, the Big Ten makes a real move to being 1A, 1B with the SEC. If that is the case, you are then asking the SEC commissioner or the Big Ten commissioner to give up power to go to one solo commissioner. And that probably is this, we've all been around people with power before. People with power don't like giving up power. This is not their deal, right? So I think the idea that we'll ever get one massive group, we're probably still decades away from that. But I think if we have two main powers, the SEC and the Big Ten, they combined can break away. And maybe at that point we'll have more power than the NCAA themselves and can kind of govern themselves. Because once you consolidate these teams, right? Because once Clemson and Florida State move and Oregon and Washington move, we're talking about a handful of schools that are left that are going to be considered tier 1 schools, right? Miami. Maybe the Carolinas, but probably not. It's really just Miami and Notre Dame at that point. Then if the Big Ten and SEC combine or partner together, the NCAA doesn't have anything against them. You're gonna work against your top earners. Well, the NCAA doesn't do anything. They have made billions of dollars literally not doing a fucking thing. It's incredible. They are the Cliff Kingsburys of college. It's just incredible. And I thought we saw with the Michigan suspension for Jim Harbaugh. The NCAA actively works against their own product. It's really insane how bad the NCAA is. So I do think we're going to get to a point where the Big Ten and the SEC do break away from the NCAA, but I don't think they're going to come under one roof for a while. And I think eventually that will be, I think that eventually will happen. But there's a good chance that I'm a grandfather at that point, because these things take a lot of time. It would be as big as the AFL and NFL merger.
Yeah, I mean, guys, I think one thing we have to kind of add to this too, right, is, kind of what we're talking about here is, in a sense, and this has been rumored, right, has kind of been that super conference, right, where it's these powerhouse programs that go under one umbrella, and then it's everybody else. And at that point, Matt, to your point, that's where you kind of get, you have FCS, FBS, and then it would be another step up, right? So it brings on an extra tier. And I think you're starting to get there as the college football playoff is going to expand. People are going to continue to complain about that and they're going to continue to add teams. I believe that they will, because they continuously will kind of cave to that pressure. But at the same time, with the more money being generated, they're not going to really have a choice. And I think the other thing we haven't really talked about is the transfer portal, right? Of the animal that has become. And I think ultimately that's why we're here, is because the transfer portal is bringing in the NIL and the transfer portal come together. And at the end of the day, these teams are continuing to form these super teams, right? So, and that's really where, and I see it as a high school coach, the landscape of college football has changed is through NIL and through the transfer portal, right? So, that's why it may take a few years, but I would not be surprised if Colorado is very far behind with Dion. As long as Dion's there, the amount of money that Dion will bring into that program and the recruits he's going to bring in, again, it may be 5 years, it may be 7 years. They're not going to be that far behind. I think they definitely cannot be considered a sleeper when you're talking about the transfer portal and NIL. And I think that could be said for a bunch of other programs that could be kind of sleepers when adding this all up to possibly add in that super conference conversation. I really don't think that we should sleep on that moving forward, because I think that really is where we could go.
No, I agree with you. The transfer portal is nuts. And with the transfer portal, I think the original idea of it was great, right? Because you get these players from like Alabama, Ohio State, who are 4 or 5 star kids who don't get the playing time they need to go transfer to somewhere else, and then you start bolstering these rosters of like a Toledo with some 4-star kids who would never gone to Toledo, and that's great. But we end up seeing, when Nick Saban added fucking Jahmyr Gibbs to his roster using the transfer portal, we're like, all right, it's been less than a couple of years, and they've already figured out how to make it work for them. But and that's a problem, right? Like that's a massive problem, because it means the rich is just getting richer, and we're seeing it in the portal, and you see it with these really stupid portal rules, like the NCAA. So with the SEC, obviously that portal season in December, anyone can go anywhere, but that second portal season, you cannot grab a kid from the SEC if you're in the SEC. So if you're a transfer kid, you're like, all right, well, the fuck am I going now? Like I was playing at Bama, and now I can't go to any of these other schools. And then you also get to the idea of like, and soon it's gonna be a 20 school conference. It's like, where are you going at this point with these kids? So it's a real mess. And one thing I wanted to add for the audience, because I don't think people truly understand or grasp the difference between the haves and have-nots in college. Right. This is just comparing from the Wall Street Journal for 2018, the evaluation of these franchises or these programs. Michigan was valued at over $900 million. Clemson, who a lot of people would say is on Michigan's level, is barely over $200 million. There's a massive drop from these top tier programs to the middle tier programs to the guys like Toledo, who I'll look up Toledo right now. I imagine it's it's $18 million. So it's like, it's not the same league. It's not, and I know and Hickey, I'll pass it back to you, because you're the big college guy, and I know you value traditional rivalries. I think the faster we can get to this 2 mega conference, or 2 mega, the Big 12, or the hell they're called at that point, and then the rest. I think it actually helps the rivalries, because the teams that are going to be clumped back together are going to be the traditional rivalries of old anyway, right? Like once we get past like the slow move of like, all right, we add 1 team this year or 3 teams this year, and just go, all right, we're going full in, we're jacking it up to 25 a school. You're going to see the Oklahoma States move into the SEC. You're going to see Notre Dame go into the Big Ten and restart that rivalry with Michigan that they haven't seen now for years, because they had that little pissing match. You're going to see Notre Dame going with the Stanfords and the Californias of the world, and the USCs of the world. So I think the faster we get to that point, the better chance we have of saving those traditional rivalries, and then also bringing some back we haven't seen before. Because right now, the slow progression of adding a school here and there is killing those rivalries, and which I know no fan wants to see that.
I guess when it comes to super conferences, like, my hesitation is just like, you guys, 20, 25 schools of conference. I guess what I just can't get past seeing is what's the point of having 25 schools in a conference if you're going to play, like it's going to take you 6 years to play everybody. Like you look at the SEC right now, the SEC, you play everyone, like if you're in the SEC West, you play everyone in the West and you rotate, you have one permanent rivalry and then you rotate one time with like a team in the East, let's say. So it's like you're having like Georgia basically, I think it's like every 7 or 8 years visiting Alabama. So it's like, even though like you are barely getting some of these great matchups now. And if you do, you're lucky if it's like in your college year or in a decade, one team comes to you at home and you have one of these big games at home. And it's like, now it's like, you're going to double the size of a conference, have like 25 schools. I guess like, maybe this is just me just being too caught up in just like the actual traditional conference meaning, which is you play everyone in your little region and then the winner of that kind of moves on and, you can go compete for a championship. And maybe I'm just stuck on that and not looking at the bigger picture of like, a super conference would bring a lot of money in and it's basically like a mini league. And even though you have 10 teams in your conference, you're never going to play. Maybe there's a chance that one of them is good and you can meet them in the title game. It's just, I guess, I just don't like that, I guess, that version going forward here, just because I still like playing a lot of schools that I'm used to. For example, being a Penn State alum, like I love playing Ohio State every single year. That's now not a guarantee going forward with UCLA and USC coming to the Big Ten. I love playing Michigan every single year, even though they have not beaten them in a while. That's not going to happen now going forward here, and that's going to rotate. So it's like it sucks that I think a lot of traditional rivalries are kind of going by the wayside just because these conferences are so big. I hear you're saying like we're going to get Texas A&M in I think 2024 because now Texas is going to SEC. Great. You lose Oklahoma State. Not great. I guess I don't know. I just don't see the vision of college football to where it's like their goal is to have the SEC with 25, the Big Ten with 25, or we're going to have two major conferences racking up all the money and kind of leave everyone else fending for themselves. I just feel like personally college football is better when there's unpredictability, when there's parity, when a team is able to come out of nowhere and win 10 or 11 games and kind of compete for something. And just now the more you kind of lean into the super conference idea and the more now the revenues for schools in the Big Ten and schools in the SEC are gradually or I should say rapidly outpacing everyone else, you're getting less and less parity. And I think overall, that to me is what's bad for college football, is when you have predictability, when you go into the season, it's like, okay, 3 teams out of the 4, we know we're going to be in the college football playoff. Now it's like, okay, who's going to be the fourth? And we know the fourth is not going to be able to compete with Georgia or traditionally Alabama, so it doesn't even really matter. Now it's basically, is it going to be Alabama's year, Georgia's year, Ohio State's year? Like, which of the 3 teams is going to win a title this year? I hate that personally. And that's what just feels like we're going towards, because the money is just so great. If you're in one of these 2 conferences right now, it's only going to get greater. And I just don't see how, if you are a quote unquote have not, which for this argument we'll just say is a team currently right now not in the Big Ten or SEC, I just don't know how you close the gap going forward here and close the gap once reshuffling happens. And if you don't make the cut, if you will, how you're going to survive.
So I would say, I think the parity between the SEC and the Big Ten and everybody else is not going to exist. That's just never going to happen again. But I think what you will have is greater parity between the teams in the Big Ten and the SEC with each other. And when you have that split, right, because we have to kind of think it, right? It's the Big Ten and SEC are by themselves in this new conference, this new division, whatever you want to call it, FBS Plus. Everyone uses the plus now for their fucking streaming services. Let's say it's that. You'll see more parity between them, right? Because they can start governing their conferences that make sense to them, right? Because right at the end, somebody's trying to govern Alabama the same way they govern Monroe, right? And this is not the same way. But when you separate them and the Big Ten can kind of govern themselves, it also allows the conferences to have more power than the individual programs, right? Because that's what happened in the Big 12 with Texas. They were so powerful that they just overran that conference, that they dictated that conference. USC dictated the Pac-12. When the SEC and the Big Ten break apart, Alabama can't just be like, well, fuck you guys, I'm going home. Because where are you going? You going to the Sun Belt? Bye. Good luck. Auburn will take your spot. Ohio State will take your spot. Michigan will take your spot. We're not worried about it. And that's how you kind of keep these groups in check. Then you can kind of start creating rules that create parity. I'm not going to say that Vanderbilt is going to become a power conference or power program anytime soon, but the biggest thing that they have to get towards is how you spend money in college, right? That will create the most level playing field possible, right? Because you're never going to get a draft in college because that's wrong. These are still students first to a degree. They still have to have a choice of where they go. So you're never going to get a draft. So you can't just draft Arch Manning to Nebraska. But if you can put a cap on how much a team can spend, you get rid of the NIL, which is ridiculous. You just have a straight cap. That way, Alabama has, if they spend $70 million, $80 million, $100 million on the 2023 class, they're probably not getting another $100 million to 24 class. You have to balance the books a bit and use some actual talent in how you recruit, and not just what we're seeing now in recruiting, which is shotgun recruiting, right? Everyone's, I don't know how much you follow recruiting, but there's like teams like Syracuse, right, that literally offer every dude that has ever been alive. I'm pretty sure you have an offer, Hickey. You don't know it.
Wow.
But you've been offered by Syracuse.
I think Matt, to that point, just to add an actual fact to this, Syracuse 2 years ago was what, 2021? They offered 2024, 2025 kids, they offered over 400 scholarships.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's 200 a class. And Matt, you would know the exact number. What is the actual allotment for a Division I program?
It's like 25.
25, right?
Yeah, it's not a lot.
So we're talking about 200% of what they had to offer. And that goes into the conversation in recruiting with a lot of these kids. To your point, Matt, before the transfer portal, people are falling upwards. No one's going down, right? Mm-hmm. But when we were in college, and when Matt was in college, even in the Stone Age years, guys would go from Division I, and maybe they'd go to a Division III, right? When I played Division III football, we had 4 Division I transfers who came in and they were starters for us. Now it's quite the opposite. You saw Colorado, they got a Maine transfer, right? That's a big difference. No one's going from SUNY Cortland to Alabama, right? But now maybe there's a kid who's going from Maine to Colorado or whatever it may be, right? So they're falling upward, and that's where kind of the transfer portal is. And that, just to your point, I just wanted to add, that's why like a Syracuse or Pittsburgh or sometimes some of these schools, they offer way too. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's a genuine issue in recruiting.
Yeah, because it's a shotgun approach. Because if you're not first to these kids, they don't want to deal with you, right? And you're just shooting all this out there. You only have like 25 scholarships in total, and that might be between high school recruits and the transfer portal. So like you may only really be given like 16 high school kids scholarships, but you're just throwing it all out there. But if you have an actual budget, an actual where that Alabama's not going to be a big player in the 2025 recruiting cycle because they spent so much in the 2024 recruiting cycle. I can focus on these 6 kids that might have gone to Bama, right? And then you also separate these high school talents from the elite of the elite to like regular college kids, right? Because I'm not sure, again, Hickey or Matt, like how often you guys look at these college rankings, but there are like 45,000 3-stars. I'm pretty sure if you can chew gum and walk, they will give you a 3-star ranking if you can put on pads properly. Because it's like the default ranking for these kids. You have to, you separate these kids and you're like, all right, here are the elite going to these top 50 schools. These 50 schools are fighting for these kids. They're getting more exposure. They're getting better opportunity. They're not just being offer weighted, which happens so often to these kids where they'll offer you a scholarship and the kid like, oh, great, I'm coming. And he's like, well, we're waiting for the tight end over here first. We're negotiating a deal for him to get a fucking Krispy Kreme scholarship of $100,000 per 3 grades he gets. All right. So like once you get away from this clusterfuck of the NCAA, because the NCAA is full of inaction, right? Once you get away from that and you get to the SEC and Big Ten governing themselves, where they can create rules that make sense, then you create parity between the leagues, between the teams. Now, I don't think you're going to see Vanderbilt challenging Alabama anytime soon. You're not going to see Northwestern challenging Michigan anytime soon. But you'll see the Wisconsins and the Nebraskas and the A&Ms and the Auburns and the Kentuckys being on par with these top-level schools. Because in order to be in this top 50 or whatever we're going to call it now, you have to have money. You have to have money. And if you don't have money, you can't play here. And that's where I think we have to get to. I know the teams that play in the Big Ten, the teams that play in the SEC, they have money. And when you get that boost from selling the Big Ten SEC with these super conferences to Fox or ESPN or CBS, you can only get more money. So I think that's where I see the allure of the super conference come from. Because I do think that, because right now, you're right, Ryan, it's Bama, Ohio State, Georgia, right? If you put money on one of those three schools, you're probably going to hit on the national champion, right? But you bring them all together, they govern themselves, and now, listen, it may not be 50, but if we can get 22, I'll take that. I'll take 22 possible national champions.
100%.
I'll take 15. And I think that's where you can get when they separate themselves. And I think where we have to look at is how they're going to divide Division One. Is it's the schools that treat like a business, and there are schools that treat like tradition. And I think that's where you see the Boise States of the world are going to be more in that kind of area where you have 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people at a stadium, and the school generates $25 million, but they're not giving the same lead with Alabama that generates $1 billion.
Anything that creates parity, that, like I said, you can go into a season 15, 10 even schools where it's like, wow, it's kind of a toss-up. Like, this could really be, one thing breaks right, we get to this school win. Like, it's not just a foregone conclusion that an SEC school or Bama or Georgia or, like, if we're talking legitimately 10, 15, 20 schools going to any given year that could win a national title, I'm in. That's truly all I want. I think parity is the best for the sport. And so whatever helps bring that out the most, the system, whatever it is, super conference, one big league, keeping it how it is now, we can figure out the best way to attain parity. I think NIL and transfer portal have helped in a positive more than a negative to achieve that. That I think was the best direction for college football going forward.
Maddie, what do you think? You're muted.
Sorry, of course I was. I was looking at how many 4-stars there were in the country at the moment. I think at the end of the day, like we talked about, money talks, and at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the TV contracts and all these things. I think the direction that it's headed, I actually don't mind it. I like what's kind of happening currently. I think like the Oregons, the Washingtons of the world, to be honest, I don't think that that's going to make the biggest differences, right? I think if you saw, like I talked about earlier, that other like super conference where you formed a whole other, Avengers type of model to college football. That's where, and I agree with Ryan, where I think the allure of college football and the tradition is going to die. And that's what I think people don't want to see. And I think that's where money will talk. Like, that's where I think money won't leverage that, because I think you'll just have an absolute revolt from fan bases. Boosters will start pulling money. And I think you're just going to have an absolute coup of people changing the landscape. And that's where it's going to happen, guys. It's going to happen through the financial side of things. And if people are not happy with what it comes down to at the end, they're going to start pulling things and it's going to become a mess. So I think in the end, I think the natural progression of what's going to happen of where we're at right now is organic, and that's where it's supposed to be. And I think truthfully, I think that's where it's going to end up.
Yeah, I agree with you talking about the revolt, and it kind of reminds me of like soccer, right? Every
What's that?
every four, it's a sport where you kick the ball through a net and you get like a goal. Apparently, there's a game happening in like 4 hours. That's very big. But every 3 or 4 years, you always hear about these super leagues popping up, right? Where a few teams in the English league and the Spanish league and Argentina will come together and be like, oh, we're going to do this, and then fan bases lose their fucking mind, and it never happens. It never goes through because English football or football in general or soccer is a lot like our college football, right? It's a lot of rivalries that go back 50, 60, 70, 100 years. And these fan bases will not let it go. They will not let it die. So they have no problem, building their conferences up, but they don't want to see their conferences turn into like this mega corporation.
Right.
And honestly, even that, my uncle, who's a big Michigan fan, went to Michigan, Big Ten guy. He hates what's going on right now, but he also understands that this is the only way for the Big Ten to survive. Is to do what they're doing. So to kind of bounce off of that, I would say the next let's say the next thing is Arizona State and Utah go to the Big 12. Let's say that's written in stone, right? And Oregon and Washington go to the Big 10. Let's say again that's written in stone. Hickey, I'll go to you first. If you were the commissioner of the Pac-12, what are you doing at this point? And then, flip side, what are you doing if you're the commissioner of the ACC and you're like, I'm fucking next. This is our conference is next.
I mean, if I'm the commissioner of the Pac-12, I'm fired. Right? Like that's it. If you're sitting there at a conference and you're looking at right now going to 2024, it's Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. You're cooked. You're done. The conference is dead. There's no going back. There's no saving it. No San Diego State or Boise State is going to come in and save the day. Like you were talking about numbers before, to throw one number at you currently. Last year, look at last year's revenues that teams, or I should say conferences, got from TV, strictly TV revenue. Big Ten led the way, $59 million. Basically, let's just say $60 million. The Big Ten was first in terms of each school's TV revenue. The Pac-12 in terms of Power 5 was last. There was a $27 million gap between what the Big Ten got and what Pac-12 got. That was with USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington in the conference. So they are dead. Deader than dead if Oregon, Washington.
Super dead.
Right. Even if honestly just Oregon and Washington leave.
And that was a $20+ million difference per school, right?
Per school.
Yeah. Per
ridiculous. School. Sorry. Yes. So Ohio State's getting basically $60 million. USC is getting basically, what is that, 35-ish, roughly $37 million.
They're saying the new deal might be closer to 22.
So that's just the gap now. And like I said, it's only growing. Big Ten new deal, SEC new deal. Pac-12 can't find a goddamn deal. So it's only growing. So it's only going to, again, make it impossible for these schools. The ACC, though, this is tough because at least from everything I have seen, schools have tried to leave. Florida State's tried to leave. Clemson has tried to leave. Miami's tried to leave. You have Brett McMurphy at one point talking about the Magnificent Seven, basically half the ACC trying to rally together and get out. To the ACC's, I guess, credit in a way, they screwed themselves with the TV deal because they locked it up through 2036, so they're not cashing in on the big money that's being given out now. But also, from everything I've seen, it's so ironclad, no one can leave. Clemson can want to leave. Florida State can want to leave. There's no loophole they can do right now in order to get out. And unless they want to, I think I forget the exact way you can get out. It's basically like a buyout, but you buy out every year from now until 2036. Schools are not made of that much money where they can basically pay it forward right now. I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. Right now, they got to pay just to get out of a TV deal, get out of the ACC. I don't see how there's a way to escape. So the ACC, if you're their commissioner and you're that league, I think right now, at least in 2023, you're feeling fine because Clemson can try to rattle all the cages they want. Florida State can threaten leaving and talk about how much happier they'll be in the Big Ten or the SEC. It doesn't matter. They're going nowhere. Legally, they can't leave. So they seemingly, for right now, should be safe. I know it's college football, so kind of anything can happen, and it makes no sense at times. So maybe I could just be dead wrong. But from everything I've read, every indication does not seem like anyone in the ACC is going anywhere anytime soon.
So I think the way they can leave is if they dissolve the league, right? And it takes 7 of the schools, or maybe 8 of the schools, to dissolve the league. So all they need is for those 7 or 8 schools to get enticed by somewhere else, right? So let's say, and Matt, I'll throw it to you, right? Clemson and Florida State do get enticed by the Big Ten, which I think is very possible. I think Miami and Vatech would be interesting for the SEC. Miami's definitely going to the SEC if that's the case. And then there's been a lot of talk about the Big 12, which I think is a very smart move. And Matt, I kind of like your opinion on this as well, that they want to build kind of like a basketball mega conference because there's still money made in basketball. There's absolutely money to be made there. It's not football money, but if you're the Big 12, you're never competing football-wise, right, with the SEC and the Big 10. But if you can kick their ass in basketball every year and, there's not a big pie for basketball, but if you can get 90% of the small pie, you're still full at the end of the day, right? So if they can get a UNC, right? If they can get a Syracuse to come down and join them, all of a sudden now we're looking at, oh man, we're starting to get to that magic number. And if the SEC is smart, and I think really all it takes is the Big Ten, pulling the trigger on Clemson and Florida State encroaching on their land for the SEC to do the same and be like, you know what? Pittsburgh is really right between the Ohios and Penn State. It's not a bad spot to go grab a guy and grab a Pittsburgh and bring him to the SEC. Grab a Miami, grab an NC State. And then at that point, now we're at 7-8 teams, and now they dissolve the league because they have better offer because they don't have to pay out. I believe if they dissolve the league, it's just dissolved, and then they can take these offers they're getting from the other conferences and cash in. So Matt, to you, if what would you do if you were the Pac-12 and the ACC, but also in the Big 12 here? Do you think that rumored strategy of let's make this basketball super conference and have Kansas and have UNC and have Texas and whoever that? Oh, not Texas, they're gone. Who are the other basketball?
Baylor's pretty good. They won a national title recently.
Yeah, see, I don't know basketball that well. I know UNC or Syracuse are pretty decent, and I know UConn has also been rumored to go to the Big 12. So if that's the case, you think that's a good kind of plan B that Big 12 is doing here? And then again, what would you do if you were the ACC or the Pac-12? Because remember, there is still a Golden Dome elephant in the room here that belongs to fucking nobody.
Golden Dome, you mean Notre Dame? No, but I mean, when you look at it, it's funny when you had brought up basketball, I was going to bring up basketball also, because to me, that really is the caveat. And to me, the dissolving of the league, if the 7 teams go out in the ACC, that's the loophole to kind of go off of kind of what Hickey was talking about in terms of, they have this ironclad deal that keeps them till 2036. But yet here we go, Matt, and you're talking about, well, you just need the 7, right? So when you're talking about these 7, if they're going to get lured away with the second biggest sport, which is basketball, right? And we all know, obviously, March Madness, all these programs are involved in that in a very heavy way. I think that you can't take that lightly, really, into this whole point, right? And so when you look at the ACC, there's a lot of other, when you talk about just the ACC in general, there's a lot of, even lacrosse, it's a very top-heavy lacrosse conference as well. And all these things kind of factor into this, right? Basketball, lacrosse, obviously football being the main domain when you talk about men's sports. But when you go back into, the other conferences, I mean, the Pac-12 was always kind of the low man on the totem pole, as you guys discussed. And, at this point, there's no hope for it. It's gone. It's done. It's over. It's dissolved. Right. So to your point, I guess the only hope for some of these conferences would really just be loopholing or trying to dissolve the other conferences by using basketball as the pull, right? So if I'm trying to hold on, that's really where you're cherry picking at this point. You're kind of creating your own network, if you will, of really high-end basketball and football schools. So I think there's really no hope for some of those programs. Like, no one's watching Pac-12 basketball or football at this point. It's over. There is no Pac-12, right? But the ACC is that caveat where you say, yeah, they have this really good TV deal, and you're right, there's no way they're made of this money to kind of get out of it. But hey, basketball brings in a lot of money too, especially with March Madness and where UNC and listen, Miami's got a good basketball program too, right? Notre Dame's got a really good basketball program.
And Duke and Virginia.
And Louisville, every single one of these programs, Boston College, right? Like, they all have very good basketball programs. So that's going to be the caveat. If I'm another conference, that's where I'm going to kind of go to next to dissolve that contract, right? To try to pull these people out. And that's the approach I would take. And it's funny you had brought basketball up, because that's exactly where I was going to go. And I think that's where, honestly, that's where it's going to work out. And again, no one wants to watch Kansas football, but they're going to want to watch Kansas basketball. So I think that's kind of, to your point, that's going to be the straw that stirs the drink. And I think that's the underlying conversation that I think college football fans have to keep an eye on is the basketball conversation.
Right. And let me just run through this real quick, right? If, let's say, the Big 12 goes that route and they're like, we're going hard on the basketball schools. We've already heard of UConn and Gonzaga being basketball only, joining the conference. I know that's been a little pushback from the teams against their commissioner, but they were able to sell us. Let's go through the top 25, I think, which is like the top programs, right? UNC, Duke, Kansas, Louisville, they grab from the ACC. They'll already have Arizona. They'll bring in Syracuse. They already had Cincinnati.
Virginia, pretty good too.
Virginia. They bring in Gonzaga. Utah's already in there. They bring in UConn. You're talking about a very, very powerful basketball conference, and powerful enough that the NCAA can't fuck them, right? Like, you're not going to have an NCAA tournament without those teams. Yeah. You're just not. You're not going to generate any revenue without those teams. So again, and I think that's where the Big 12 is, if they're doing it smart, like, you know what? We know we can't compete with the SEC and the Big 10. But we can compete in basketball. But we also have to rip the power away from the NCAA. And if the NCAA is already beefing with the Big 10 and the SEC, which they probably end up doing, they're not going to then beef with the only remaining moneymaker they have left, which is basketball. They'll just let it ride, and they'll figure out a way to make it work. Because if not, then the Big 12 and SEC and the Big 10 are going to have their own basketball tournament, and the NCAA will just dissolve into nothing. Yeah. And they can go, suspend field hockey coaches for recruiting violations. So I'm sure that'll be the next thing they freaking do. But Hickey, what do you think of that basketball idea?
I like it in the sense that you're right. Like, the Big 12 will never be able to compete with the SEC and the Big 10 for football. And so I think the faster, like you said, you move off of that and you realize, okay, what's the next best avenue we can exploit and take advantage of? Basketball, like I said, is obviously the one for the entire NCAA. I mean, that's where they make the majority of their money, right, is March Madness and rolling all those deals. So I like the pivot in the sense, and I think it's part of the reason why we've seen since Brett Yormark's taken over the Big 12, why they've been aggressive and why they've frankly survived. There was a major thought that they were going to just collapse and the Big 12 is dead as soon as the news of Texas and Oklahoma are leaving the conference going to the SEC. It was easy to look at them and say, oh, all right, see you later, they're done. They're like, it was a nice run. Oklahoma State's going to run somewhere else and hide. Kansas State going to maybe team up and go somewhere else. And you easily saw a split where I'm sure at this point, that came out like 2 years ago, roughly 3 years ago, when that first news broke. I'm sure the Pac-12 was giddy and said, okay, like, we're going to take our pick of the litter here and we're going to be good. And to the Big 12's credit, like, that's part of the reason why they hired Yormark, especially coming from the Nets and having a basketball background, was, oh, no, there's still money here. And there's still a way for us to have power and influence. It may not be in football because outside, like you said, the two major conferences, no one's going to have any serious influence in football. Let's just go with the second biggest sport then, a sport people still care about, a sport that still, it generates money. Let's just go dominate that. And so to the Big 12's credit, absolutely, they're an attractive basketball conference by far. And like I said, if you are a UConn, if you are now a school in the ACC, if you're able to break free or, like I said, form up to try to dissolve and just purposely tear down the ACC, Big 12 comes calling. It's attractive. It's absolutely attractive.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Matt.
No. What I was just going to say is when you deep dive into the Big 12 and you look at it, it's very attractive. And I was just looking at it because I'm thinking in my head, who's in the Big 12, right? And when you talk about basketball, West Virginia is always a really good program. Iowa State is a pretty underrated program. Kansas is good. Oklahoma's been good. Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Baylor, Houston, Texas. I mean, the whole thing, aside from BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, and Texas Tech, they're all very, very good, and they're always in the mix. Like they are very good programs. So if you're the Big 12, that's where you have to pull from the ACC, and that's if there's one conference that's going to do it, it would be the Big 12 for these reasons, because they have really, really powerful basketball programs. But also when you look at it, Texas is a really big, obviously, football program, right? K-State's a really good football program as well. West Virginia isn't too shabby. Oklahoma, obviously, but they're in the SEC in terms of football. But when you look at it, it's really not too bad. Texas Tech's a pretty decent program. Like it's not that bad. It's definitely better. I think personally, it could be just as good as the ACC football wise, especially if you start pulling those ACC programs in.
Yeah, and I think talking about the Big 12 again and like how aggressive they've been. I did see a report saying that the Big 10, like I said, had already approved Oregon and Washington. I've heard that for now about a year, but the reports that they were waiting because they didn't want to have the Pac-12's blood on their hands. I heard that it was originally because they were waiting for Notre Dame. The Big 12 has had no problems absolutely just fucking killing conferences, right? They killed the Big East. The Big East died because the Pac-12, the Big 12 was like, listen, either they die or we die. And we're going to take West Virginia. We're going to take what else did they take from them? I think this is just West Virginia, right? And they took Syracuse.
Well, the ACC, took a lot of the Big East guys.
But they grabbed West Virginia, and then they took a bunch of other schools. They took TCU from the Mountain West, and they had no problem taking some of these powered schools from other areas. And like, listen, we're just doing it. Screw it. We're taking it. And now we're seeing it, the same thing with the Pac-12. Like, you know what? We see these guys are limping. We're taking their guys. We're going to make them stronger. And I guarantee you, when you when it says what's it called, when the ACC starts limping, they're going to take them, right? They're going to absolutely take them. And I made this joke to Ryan Leaf, famous Wazoo graduate. I made this joke to him during the season. I said, Ryan, man, Wazoo 2025 Mountain West champions. I was joking, but right now it seems that's would be pretty real at this point. You want to break that or no?
I'll break it. I mean, I won't put out my source, but I do have a source at Oregon who said to me, I would not count us out in the Big 12. So that's from Oregon.
Wow.
Football. I will not say who it is. Of course, I'm not going to reveal my sources. However, my source at the University of Oregon football has told me that I would not count them out for the Big 12. He said a lot of people think that the Big 10 is done. However, he said I would not count us out for the Big 12.
Hickey, what do you think of that?
You talk about a power move. That's kind of best of both worlds. Oregon basketball has been good and been productive, and now all of a sudden you bring a massive – like Oregon's a huge brand. They're backed by Nike, obviously. You have a big following in the Pacific Northwest. You can – I would assume – I got a dangerous assumption. I would assume Washington's going to toe wherever Oregon goes. It's a good rivalry. Again, a very big school, very big following. So if you can get those two schools on your side and you, again, spur maybe the Big 10 and now go to the Big 12, that's usually a power move. That's a big time move from the Big 12. They can able to land that.
That would be massive, right? Because that keeps them in the football conversation. Keeping the West Coast intact. Listen, yes, the Big Ten will still have USC and UCLA, which were the the heart of the Pac-12. But if you can keep the rest of it intact and you combine it with the South of the Big 12, all of a sudden it goes from being a Big 2 to a Big 3. And now the Big 12 will have a lot more say in what they do. If I'm the Big 10, though, I am on the phone with Oregon right now because you can't let a conference survive, because you know that in the end, there's only going to be one or two conferences standing. And if you're the Big 10, you want to be you in that conversation. With the addition of the West, of getting Oregon, Washington, the 4 schools in the South with Arizona and Utah, the Big 12 is positioning themselves to fight with the Big 10, that second spot, which you do not want, because the Big 10 at that point is a top heavy conference, right? Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, and then you can kind of argue like in the second tier, Wisconsin, UCLA, Nebraska, I guess. But like it's a top heavy conference. If any of those 4 schools decide to bounce from the Big 10 to the Big 12 at any point, the Big 10 becomes very, very vulnerable, right? That would be a massive problem if Ohio State was like, you know what? We're good. We're going to the SEC. Or if USC was like, you know what? We're tired of traveling to the Midwest all the time. All of our former rivals of the Big 12, and they have a pretty good conference over there. We can make a little more money. Go to the Big 12. Like I really think the power for these conferences is going to come in top-heavy numbers. Oregon is a tier 2 team, tier 2 program like Washington. Not adding those, it would be a massive loss for the Big 10. If that is the case, let's say that is the case, and Oregon and Washington, like you said, Hickey, are in lockstep, and they go with the Arizonas and Utah, then join Colorado in the Big 12, the Big 10 would be in serious trouble going forward.
It makes all the sense in the world, too, if you're the Big 10 to add them. I mean, what has been ever since the news broke of USC and UCLA going to the Big 10, the biggest discussion has been the travel. They're going to have to go to Maryland, go to Rutgers. They're going literally across the country, and it's not just football. I know a lot of people talked about other secondary sports. I know, obviously, that's not the big revenue or why we don't talk a lot about those sports that are non-football or basketball anyway. But it's like, even if you are UCLA or USC, do you really want to be making back-to-back trips sometimes to Rutgers and Maryland in back-to-back weeks? It just makes their lives easier and just makes them happier members. I know the paycheck is going to make everyone happy. I understand that. But if you have a little bit of a Western division in the Big 10 where it's USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, I think you help out everyone in your conference, make the travel for USC and UCLA lighter. Again, you bring in 2 big name brand conferences as well to kind of bolster the depth and bolster the strength of the Big 10 as well. And just bring also some good football. Like, those are competitive teams with good quarterbacks. I know right now things will change, but at least presumably good head coaches in place going forward here, where again, kind of like the SEC, you want your conference to not only be strong in terms of size and eyeballs and revenue, but part of that is also putting good football on the field. Those are 2 teams that I don't see going downhill anytime soon. They'll be players for the college football playoff every single year without a doubt, especially when it goes to 12 teams. I think they're both players for this year's college football playoff with 4 teams. And so to not add that or get outbid by the Big 12, I'm with you, would be a big mistake. Big mistake. And
then I think also, and I'll throw back to you, Matt, in a second, like if let's say they do that, let's say they get those teams. I think the Big 12 becomes a more attractive conference for Clemson and Florida State to jump to than the Big 10, right? Because the Big 10 is still very top heavy. You have to listen to Michigan, you have to listen to Ohio State, Penn State. Like, those teams are going to dictate with USC what happens in that conference. There isn't anyone like that in the Big 12, right? And in the SEC, you have to kind of bend to Bama and Georgia. Whatever they want is going to, and Florida and Tennessee, like whatever happens to those schools is going to happen to you. In the Big 12, you can kind of, it's almost like a power in numbers type deal, right? And then I think that if they get Oregon and Washington, I would not be shocked if Clemson and Florida State and the ACC 7, the Magnificent 7, whatever Peter's calling them or Brett's calling them, they might join the Big 12, and then Hickey, I don't think you're that far off from your super conference, and then, because that could be it, right? Because that was the big thing stopping the super conference is you have these old programs that control a lot of the money at the head of these old conferences. If they are no longer at the top and it's the Big 12 and they're 40 fucking schools they'll have, but they have enough schools, enough numbers to dictate what happens, and they can just pull off one massive upset like a Notre Dame that does not want to join the Big 10. They do not want to do it. Imagine if they pull that off and they get these West Coast teams, they pull the ACC teams with the basketball programs in Clemson, Florida State, and they pull Notre Dame in to be their top team. The Big 10 SEC would be really scared. And I think you could see this massive. Holy shit! I didn't think about that. It would be crazy. Matt, what do you? All right, what do you think if that happens? Oregon, Washington join the Big 12. What do you think?
I mean, listen, I think to Hickey's point, the western side of things in the Big 10 would make a lot of sense, right? That's the kind of attractive thing, and I think even for both parties, right, for both sides, for the West Coast teams having to go east and the East Coast teams having to go west, kind of together, it makes a lot of sense. But then you throw in the possibility of the Big 12, and I in a sense, it's kind of like we're talking. I feel like we keep going over the same stuff, but at the same time, it goes back to that basketball conversation, right? Because I think that's where, to both your and Hickey's point, Matt, it's going to take those 7 programs to dissolve the ACC. So that means 7 programs are going to have to go. Do they all go to the Big 12? I doubt that, right? I mean, at that point, now you're talking about some crazy, schedules and a ridiculous amount of teams at the Big 12 level. But I think from a basketball standpoint and a football standpoint, I mean, let's talk about that for a second, right? I think the Big 12 is the more attractive basketball thing at the conference at that point. I mean, when you look at it, I mean, that's up for debate, obviously, but that, again, like, where does Duke then fall into that conversation? Because Duke football stinks. But Duke basketball is very obviously, as we know, is a premier flagship college basketball program. So is it a Duke that comes over? And then, you know what, UNC goes, well, and again, you talk about the money factor and the TV factor, UNC goes, right? Because there's that rivalry and that old adage of rivalry that we talk about, and that stays true for basketball too. So is it one of those? Is it one of those? Do they lure a weak link like a Duke to go get a UNC, right? And use that leverage of basketball again to do that. And I think, truthfully, at that point, the Big 12 becomes the more attractive conference due to, I think, it's a stronger basketball conference. I just went over the names basketball wise. That is the better. And again, Hickey, I know you know the Big 10, very well. Do you think that the Big 12 is better than the Big 10 basketball wise?
Basketball wise, probably. But I guess the thing I would say is right now, the ACC, I would say, is better than the Big 10 basketball wise. ACC is definitely better than the SEC basketball wise on the whole, right? Last year, maybe notwithstanding, but overall, and we do know who the power conferences are. So I think it's also tough in the sense that, like, you can be good and dominate the basketball landscape. We even saw the Big East for a while too, like, with the old Big East, Georgetown, St. John's, Syracuse, like, dominated the basketball landscape, and what split it up was football. Right. And so that's the thing too, at the end of the day, like, I like what the Big 12 is doing in terms of kind of, like I said, going kind of zigging when everyone's zagging, going the basketball route. I just still, at least right now, and maybe I can't foresee it, so shame on me if that's the case. I just can't foresee right now the Big 12 overtaking either the Big 10 or the SEC just because football is still king at the end of the day. And even if you're a dominant premier basketball conference, it still does not pull as much weight as football does.
Sure.
No, I agree with that. I think the only way I see them taking that from the Big Ten SEC is if they pull off this Oregon thing in Washington, and then they're able to pull off this ACC debacle, which I agree. I think, it doesn't take that hard to get the 7, right? Louisville, Syracuse, Duke, UNC, FSU, Clemson, Florida State. That's all it takes, right? And if you're building a basketball conference, they'll take Duke and UNC and Syracuse and Virginia and Louisville in a heartbeat, right? And now let's say you're Clemson and Florida State. You either choose to go to the Big Ten and be the bitch boy of Ohio State, Michigan, or you go to the SEC and become the bitch boy of Georgia and Alabama, or you go to the Big 12 where no one exists and you could be the big dog. And Clemson does not want to be the small dog. It's the reason why they haven't left to begin with. They want to be the number 1 guy. They join that, you add Notre Dame, all of a sudden, I think there's a shot that down the line, not saying right now, I'm saying like 2030, 2033, Penn State gets tired of playing second fiddle to Ohio State. A Tennessee gets tired of playing second fiddle to Alabama, and they join. Especially if Notre Dame is already there, and you have Notre Dame, Florida State, maybe Miami, Clemson, Oregon, Washington in this conference. So you already have these top level programs. So it's not like you're going to like the Mountain West or something. You're just leaving what a team might be perceiving of having to bend to the will of your competitors, and go to a place where you can kind of make the rules yourself, and be a part of a different program. Which I think, I don't think you're gonna get an Ohio State dragged away, or a Michigan, or an Alabama, or a Georgia, but Tennessee, Penn State, like A&M, definitely an A&M, and let's see how long it takes Texas to not like the idea of playing, second field to Alabama. I think in the Big 12, or they tend to move with the name of number of players, number of teams they have. So let's say the Big 37 has these guys, and Texas is taking a shellacking from Bama for a decade, and they're not making the money they used to make on their own network. And they see, the Big 37, I can go back and be a big dog with Clemson. I have no affiliation with the SEC. I don't need to be here. They could jump. A&M could jump. Oklahoma could jump. So Tennessee could jump. Kentucky could jump. Penn State could jump. Nebraska could jump. Again, I don't think they're going to be able to lure like a Michigan or Ohio State, a Bama or a Georgia or a Florida. But if the conference is just Ohio State, Michigan, and then Rutgers, the conference doesn't mean anything anyway. You're essentially playing the WAC with Gonzaga, right? Like you're a nothing conference with one power team. And I think there is a path there for the Big 12. It's an unlikely path. It's a difficult path, and it's a path that will probably take us well past our deathbeds, but it's a path. And a path that I did not foresee 90 minutes ago. So it is that I know Oregon doesn't feel like it's the end all be all of college football, but losing the West to the Big 12, I think would be huge. Let's wrap on this because we're going for about 90 minutes at this point. Hickey, I'll end with you because you're the guest. But the next move you feel is going to happen, the thing that is making Brett McMurphy's eyes pop out of its socket. Again, let's assume it's not a dime bag with Mr. Irsay. Let's assume it's an actual thing that's happening in college football. The next thing that's going to happen away from the Arizona and Utahs, I'm going to go ahead and say, I'll go against your source here, Matt. Oregon, Washington to the Big Ten. Matt, what do you think?
I thought we were throwing off to Hickey. I mean, he's the guest.
No. He's last. He rounds out the show.
Okay, fair.
He is the closer. We keep Trace at the end.
I will say, my gut says I think they go Big 12. Washington and Oregon go Big 12 against the rumors and the speculation. I have a weird feeling, kind of keep the West intact a little bit. I think it keeps some things, it changes some things, and then our next episode will be on the ACC. So there you go.
Hickey, take us home.
I will agree with you, Matt Stopsky, in the sense that I just think that it's Oregon and Washington for me. I think the Big Ten makes too much sense. I'm not calling you a liar, Matt, or calling out information.
Oh, my source a liar.
No, we're not doing that at all here. I just think it makes too much sense from Oregon and Washington's perspective, along with the Big Ten, to not make this partnership happen. Again, you already have kind of a small base with USC and UCLA out there, so you have friendly confines and opponents you're familiar with. Also, the TV revenue for the Big Ten is already going to be big. I think it's going to go even bigger if you bring two more big name national brands as well. So I think from the Big Ten's perspective, or I think from Oregon and Washington's perspective, the money's going to be too great to turn down for the Big Ten. Also, if you're the Big Ten, again, you keep adding depth to your already big conference, make your brand new partners in UCLA and USC a little bit happier by not forcing them to come out to the Midwest or the East Coast every single week to play a game. I just think that partnership, that marriage, to me, makes too much sense for it not to happen. So I'll go Oregon, Washington to the Big Ten.
I love it. Ryan Hickey, you can find him 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock a.m. Eastern time on Saturdays. CBS
Prime time,
Radio.
baby.
Very early morning drive.
Yeah,
that's or the late night from the bar. That works too.
Either
I'm getting back in the bar, or I had a really rough night at the bar. Time slot. Hick at night. CBS Sports Radio, 2 to 6 on Saturdays. You can find him on the Zach Gelb Show. CBS Sports Radio, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Friday, or the Blue Horseshoe podcast. Download whenever. He's on TikTok. He's reviewing. What were you reviewing? Something weird.
Peanut butter and jelly.
Peanut butter and jelly last time. I saw you
in the
doing
shower, that. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's right. You guys are all caught up.
Yeah, man. So we make sure we're on top of it. Thank you so much for joining us. Anything else the viewers should know about where they can find your sports take and or take on peanut butter and jelly?
Well, not to spoil, but here's a tease. Big peanut butter review coming this week later on in all the social medias you just mentioned. People have called me biased in the peanut butter that I like. Jif, best peanut butter, just throwing it out there. We're doing, to reveal it, a blind taste test. Skippy, Jif, to truly see if there's a difference. There's a difference. I promise you there's a big difference. As a peanut butter connoisseur, I like to consider myself as, I know there's a difference. And with a blindfold on, I'll prove to everyone there's a big difference. This week, let's go.
Ryan Hickey Show on TikTok, at Ryan_Hickey3 on what is now called X, the worst rebrand in the history of corporate rebrands. Even Entercom to Odyssey, the worst rebrand in the history of corporate rebrand. Hickey, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Fellas, always a pleasure. A lot of fun. Hopefully we'll do it again soon. Be well, guys.